The date was November 22nd, 1987. It was a typical Sunday evening in the city of Chicago. Families gathered in their living rooms. The glow of television sets filled the darkness. People were settling in after a long weekend. The air was getting colder, a sign of the approaching winter. On the local CBS affiliate, WGN-TV, the 9 o'clock news was on. The anchors delivered the day's stories with a familiar calm. Viewers watched, comfortable and unsuspecting. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was just another night in a bustling American city, filled with the routine sounds and sights of broadcast television. For the people of Chicago, television was a constant, reliable companion. It brought them news, sports, and entertainment. It was a window to the world, but also a source of local comfort. On this particular night, sportscaster Dan Roan was recapping the Chicago Bears' victory over the Detroit Lions. His voice was a familiar presence in thousands of homes. The broadcast was smooth, professional, and predictable. No one had any reason to believe that this electronic ritual was about to be shattered. The television signal, a constant stream of information, was considered secure. It was a one-way street, from the station to the home. The idea that someone could break into it was the stuff of science fiction. The technology of 1987 was a world away from today. There was no internet in every home. There were no smartphones or social media feeds. The television set was the primary source of mass communication. Its signal traveled through the air, captured by antennas on rooftops across the city. This system had worked for decades. It felt permanent and unbreachable. The engineers at the television stations were masters of their craft. They ensured the broadcast went out without a hitch, night after night. The thought of a hostile takeover of their airwaves was not a common concern. It was simply not something that happened. But beneath the surface of this technological calm, a plan was in motion. Someone, somewhere in the Chicago area, was preparing to do the impossible. They had the technical knowledge and the audacity to challenge the very foundation of broadcast television. They had acquired the necessary equipment. They had chosen their moment. As the city watched the news, this unknown individual was getting ready to unleash a bizarre and unsettling performance. They would turn a trusted medium into a source of chaos and confusion. The normal Sunday night was about to take a turn into the strange and the unexplained, leaving a mystery that would last for decades. The first sign of trouble came at 9:14 p.m. Dan Roan was in the middle of his sports report on WGN-TV. Suddenly the screen went black for 15 seconds. For viewers at home, it was a momentary annoyance. Maybe it just seemed like a technical glitch at the station. These things happen from time to time. But then, the screen flickered back to life with a strange and jarring image. A figure appeared, wearing a rubbery Max Headroom mask. The background was a sheet of corrugated metal, spinning slowly. A loud, buzzing static sound filled the speakers. It was a jarring and unexpected interruption. The figure in the mask did not speak, it just moved its head back and forth erratically. The distorted buzzing noise was the only sound. The entire broadcast lasted for only about 25 seconds. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The engineers at WGN-TV acted quickly. They managed to switch their transmission frequency, cutting off the pirate signal. Dan Roan reappeared on the screen, looking slightly confused. He said, "Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I." He then calmly finished his report. For most viewers, the incident was over. It was a strange, brief moment that was quickly forgotten. But this was not the end. It was only a rehearsal. The hijacker had successfully broken into a major television station's signal. They had tested their equipment and their method. They had proven it could be done. The WGN intrusion was a warning shot, a prelude to a much more audacious act. The brevity of the first attack meant that few people truly grasped what had happened. It was dismissed as a prank or a technical error. The station's quick response gave a false sense of security. They believed they had handled the problem. They did not know that the hijacker was far from finished. The choice of Max Headroom was itself a strange one. Max Headroom was a famous character from the 1980s. He was a computer-generated television host, known for his stuttering, distorted voice and satirical wit. He was a symbol of corporate media and futuristic technology. By wearing the mask, the hijacker was adopting a well-known yet unsettling persona. It added a layer of bizarre pop culture commentary to the act. The silent, buzzing figure was a creepy parody of the real Max Headroom. It was a phantom version, stripped of its humor and turned into something purely menacing. This was just the beginning of the night's strangeness. 2 hours later, the hijacker struck again. This time the target was WTTW, Chicago's public broadcasting station. It was approximately 11:15 p.m. The station was airing an episode of the classic science fiction show, Doctor Who. The episode was The Horror of Fang Rock. Many viewers were engrossed in the story. Suddenly, their screens went dark. The familiar show was replaced by the same strange figure in the Max Headroom mask. This time, however, the broadcast was longer. It was clearer, and it was much weirder. The hijacker was back, and this time they had something to say. The pirate broadcast began with the same spinning corrugated background, but now there was audio. It was distorted and garbled, but words could be made out. The masked figure rocked back and forth, its voice a strange, high-pitched mumble. He made a series of bizarre statements. He mocked WGN and its sports anchor, Chuck Swirsky, whom he called a frickin' liberal. He hummed the theme song to the 1959 cartoon series Clutch Cargo. He held up a Pepsi can and said, "Catch the wave," a reference to a popular Coca-Cola advertising slogan. The entire performance was a chaotic jumble of pop culture references and seemingly random nonsense. The scene became even more disturbing. The figure talked about his brother and seemed to be wearing a strange glove. He rambled on, his voice distorted and echoing. The visuals were jerky and unstable. It felt like watching a transmission from another dimension, a place where logic did not apply. The performance was manic and unsettling. For the viewers at home watching Doctor Who, this was far more frightening than the show they had been enjoying. This was real. It was happening on their televisions, in their own homes, and no one knew what it meant or who was behind it. The broadcast reached its bizarre climax in the final moments. The figure bent over, exposing his bare buttocks to the camera. Another person, partially off-screen and wearing what appeared to be a French-maid costume, spanked him with a fly swatter. The masked figure screamed in a distorted, echoing voice. Then, after about 90 seconds of this strange and crude display, the screen went to black. The hijack was over. The normal programming of WTTW returned, but the damage was done. Thousands of viewers had witnessed one of the most bizarre and disturbing events in television history. The mystery had just begun. While viewers at home were shocked and confused, the staff at WTTW were in a state of panic. The station's control room, usually a place of calm professionalism, was thrown into chaos. The engineers on duty watched helplessly as their signal was commandeered. The pirate broadcast was appearing on their own monitors. They could see the strange man in the mask, but they could not stop him. The hijacker was using a powerful transmission that overpowered the station's own signal. The engineers were locked out of their own airwaves. It was a broadcaster's worst nightmare come to life. The problem was a matter of location. WTTW's broadcast transmitter was located on top of the Sears Tower, now known as the Willis Tower. The main studio and its engineers, however, were in a different part of the city. There was no one at the transmitter site who could manually intervene. The engineers in the control room frantically tried to find a way to regain control. They tried to boost their own signal, but the pirate transmission was too strong. They were completely powerless. All they could do was watch the bizarre spectacle unfold, just like everyone else at home. The station was flooded with phone calls. Confused and frightened viewers wanted to know what was happening. Was this a joke? Was it a real emergency? The station staff had no answers. They were just as baffled as the public. The 90-second broadcast felt like an eternity. For the engineers, it was a professional failure of the highest order. Their job was to maintain the integrity of the broadcast, and they had been defeated by an unknown attacker. The feeling of helplessness was immense. They had been outsmarted and overpowered. Once the pirate signal finally ceased, the WTTW staff immediately began to investigate. They checked their equipment and reviewed their security protocols. They knew this was a serious breach. It was not just a prank, it was a federal crime. They contacted the authorities, including the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The search for the hijacker had officially begun. The engineers could provide some technical clues about how the intrusion might have happened, but they had no idea who was responsible. The phantom of the airwaves had vanished without a trace, leaving only confusion and fear in his wake. The content of the Max Headroom broadcast remains a subject of intense debate. It was a stream of consciousness rant, filled with inside jokes and obscure references. To the average viewer, honestly, it was utter nonsense. The hijacker seemed to be performing for a very specific audience, or perhaps for no one at all. He mentioned the name Chuck Swirsky, a well-known Chicago sportscaster. He hummed the theme to Clutch Cargo, an old cartoon famous for its limited animation style. These references seemed random, but they suggested the hijacker was familiar with both local media and television history. The audio was heavily distorted, processed through an audio modulator to make it sound strange and electronic. This made some of the words, difficult to understand. It also served to disguise the person's real voice, making identification nearly impossible. The visual presentation was equally chaotic. The constantly moving background was designed to be disorienting. The jerky movements of the masked figure added to the sense of unease. This was not a polished production. It felt raw, improvised, and dangerously unpredictable. It was a performance of pure anarchy, broadcast directly into people's homes. One of the most puzzling elements was the motive. Why would someone go to such great lengths to broadcast this bizarre message? There was no clear political statement. There was no demand for money. It did not seem to be promoting any product or cause. The only clear message was one of disruption. The hijacker seemed to revel in the act of chaos itself. He was mocking the corporate nature of television, represented by Max Headroom and the Coca-Cola slogan. He was also demonstrating his technical superiority over the established broadcasters. The act itself was the message. The crude ending, with the spanking scene, cemented the broadcast's reputation for being both juvenile and disturbing. It suggested a level of immaturity, yet the technical skill required for the hack was considerable. This contradiction is at the heart of the mystery. Was this the work of a brilliant but disturbed genius? Or was it just a group of tech-savvy pranksters with a strange sense of humor? Without any claim of responsibility, all that was left was the strange recording itself. It was a digital ghost, a bizarre piece of evidence from a crime with no suspect and no clear motive. In the days following the hijacking, a full-scale federal investigation was launched. The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, which is the agency responsible for regulating the airwaves, took the lead. They worked alongside the FBI. The crime was a serious one. Violating federal broadcast regulations could lead to heavy fines and prison time. The investigators were determined to find the person or people responsible. They believed that the sophisticated nature of the attack would surely leave behind some clues. They began by analyzing the pirate broadcast itself for any hidden information. The investigators had a key piece of information. To hijack the signal, the pirate transmitter had to be located within the line of sight of the television station's main transmitter. For both WGN and WTTW, these transmitters were on top of two of Chicago's tallest skyscrapers, the John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower. This meant the hijacker had to be somewhere with a clear view of the downtown Chicago skyline, likely from a high-rise building or a tall apartment complex. The FCC sent agents driving around the city with specialized detection equipment, hoping to pinpoint the source of the rogue signal. Unfortunately, the hijackers were just too quick. The broadcasts were short, lasting only 25 seconds and 90 seconds respectively. This just wasn't enough time for the authorities to get a precise lock on the signal's origin. By the time the FCC engineers could react, the pirate transmission was already over. The hijacker had vanished. The investigation then turned to other leads. They interviewed disgruntled former employees of local television stations. They looked into local hacker communities and electronics hobbyist groups. They followed up on hundreds of tips from the public, but every lead went nowhere. The trail quickly grew cold. The hijackers had been careful. They left no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no clear evidence. The technical skill involved suggested someone with a background in broadcast engineering or satellite technology. Yet, no one from that community ever came forward. The FBI and FCC investigation remained open for years, but no arrests were ever made. The case file just grew thicker with reports and dead ends. The Max Headroom hijacker had achieved a perfect crime. They had appeared out of nowhere, created a moment of pure chaos, and then disappeared back into the static, never to be heard from again. In the absence of any official answers, a number of theories emerged to explain the Max Headroom incident. These theories have been debated by amateur sleuths and internet detectives for decades. One of the most prominent theories centers on the Chicago art scene and a group of counterculture activists. Some believe the hijacking was a form of performance art, a statement against the commercialism and conformity of mainstream media. The use of the Max Headroom persona, a critique of corporate culture, seems to support this idea. The chaotic and nonsensical nature of the broadcast could be seen as a deliberate artistic choice. Another popular theory points to a specific group of hackers and phone freaks who were active in the Chicago area during the 1980s. This community was known for its technical prowess and its anti-authoritarian streak. They enjoyed exploring and exploiting technological systems, including the telephone network and early computer systems. A television signal hijacking would have been the ultimate challenge for such a group. The inside jokes and obscure references in the broadcast might have been messages intended for others within this small, secretive community. The technical knowledge required certainly fits the profile of these early digital pioneers. Over the years, a few individuals have been named as potential suspects, though no concrete evidence has ever linked them to the crime. One person of interest was a man who had connections to the local hacking scene and a quirky, artistic sensibility. Another theory involved a musician and artist who was known for his strange and provocative performances. However, these are just speculations. The individuals involved have either denied any connection or have never been formally investigated. The mystery is protected by a code of silence, either out of fear of prosecution or a desire to preserve the legend. The most chilling theory is that the hijacker was simply a lone individual, a brilliant but socially isolated person with a deep knowledge of broadcast technology. This person may have had a personal grudge against WGN or just a general disdain for society. In this scenario, the broadcast was not a prank or a piece of art, but the rambling of a disturbed mind. The lack of any further incidents could mean the person was satisfied with their one moment of infamy, or perhaps they feared being caught. This theory adds a darker, more personal layer to the mystery, suggesting a troubled ghost in the machine. The Max Headroom incident did not just fade into history. Instead, it grew into a legend. It became a cornerstone of internet folklore and a classic example of a real-world mystery. Long before viral videos and social media challenges, the hijacker created a moment of truly viral chaos. The grainy, distorted footage of the broadcast has been uploaded, shared, and analyzed thousands of times. It has become a cultural touchstone for discussions about media, hacking, and unsolved crimes. The event's fame grew far beyond the city of Chicago, turning the anonymous hijacker into a digital phantom. The incident has had a lasting impact on popular culture. It has been referenced in television shows, movies, and music. The image of the grinning, glitching Max Headroom mask has become a symbol of rebellion and digital anarchy. For a generation of hackers and activists, the hijacking was an inspirational act. It showed that even the most powerful and established systems could be challenged. It was a demonstration that a single, clever individual could disrupt the flow of information and make their voice heard, even if that voice was spouting nonsense. The legacy of the event is one of empowerment through disruption. The mystery also serves as a time capsule from a different technological era. It happened at a moment when the world was on the cusp of the digital revolution. The methods used by the hijacker, involving microwave signals and broadcast transmitters, seem almost quaint by today's standards. Yet, the core of the act remains relevant. The fear of our technology being turned against us is a modern anxiety. The Max Headroom incident was an early warning that the systems we rely on are not as secure as we think. It was a preview of the digital vulnerabilities that would become a major concern in the 21st century. Ultimately, the enduring power of the story comes from its lack of resolution. Because the case was never solved, it remains a perfect mystery. There is no simple explanation to neatly wrap up the story. We are left with only the bizarre footage and our own speculation. The hijacker's anonymity makes him a blank screen onto which we can project our own fears and fascinations. He is a trickster, an artist, a madman, a genius. He is all of these things and none of them. His legacy is the question mark he left behind, a permanent glitch in the history of television. Today, more than 3 decades have passed since that strange November night. The world has changed in ways that would have been unimaginable in 1987. The analog world of broadcast television has given way to the digital universe of the internet. Yet the Max Headroom hijacking remains as compelling and unsettling as ever. It stands as one of the most audacious and bizarre unsolved crimes of the 20th century. The federal statute of limitations has long since expired, meaning the hijacker could now come forward without fear of prosecution. But silence is all that remains. The event is remembered not just for the technical skill it required, but for its sheer, unadulterated strangeness. It was a moment of pure surrealism injected directly into the mainstream. It broke the unwritten rule of television that the broadcast is a safe, controlled space. For 90 seconds it became a portal to chaos. The distorted voice, the spinning background, and the creepy mask created a deeply unsettling experience. It was a violation of the trust between the broadcaster and the viewer. It left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of a city, and eventually, the world. The mystery endures because it taps into a fundamental human fear, the fear of the unknown. We are confronted with an event that has no logical explanation. There is no clear motive, no identified culprit, and no resolution. It is a story without an ending. This lack of closure is what makes it so fascinating and so creepy. It forces us to confront the possibility that some things are simply unknowable. The Max Headroom incident is a modern ghost story, a tale of a phantom who haunted the airwaves for a brief, terrifying moment and then vanished forever. In the end, the hijacking is more than just a historical footnote or a piece of trivia. It is a persistent question that hangs in the air. Who was the man behind the mask? What was he trying to say? And where did he go? These questions will likely never be answered. The identity of the hijacker is locked away in the past, a secret known only to a select few, or perhaps to just one person. The Max Headroom broadcast remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the signal can be interrupted, and that behind the comforting glow of the television screen, a deep and unsettling mystery can be waiting.